Hello and welcome to the New Food Hub. I'm Gemma Tadman, Business Communications Manager at ProVeg International, and today I'm talking with Justin Kolbeck, co-founder and CEO of Wildtype, an innovative food tech company working on sushi salmon. To begin with, Justin, why did Wildtype start with sushi salmon? Why not tuna or cod or another type of fish?
Thanks, Gemma. So it's a great question and one that we struggled with a bit. And I think it's worth backing up and asking the first question of why seafood and not something else. And then I'd love to answer the question about why salmon and not some other form of seafood. So, we started almost 7 years ago now, as we've been at this for a while. And when we were deciding where to point such a powerful technology like cultivated meat and seafood, we quickly landed on seafood as the main thing that we need to be working on for three big reasons. One, it's the single largest source of protein for our species globally. And at the same time, very few companies were working on some kind of an alternative to seafood that didn't rely on fish. And as you know, demand for seafood has been increasing significantly, both here in the United States and around the world. And unlike terrestrial meat, supply has been falling, and it's because wild fish stocks are declining and it's becoming more and more difficult to farm fish. And so that's why we picked seafood. And the other reason I'd say equally important is that because we polluted our waters, our fish is often polluted with things that we don't want to find in the products, like mercury and microplastics and antibiotics and parasites, and I can go on and on. And so being able to take that out of the product seemed like an incredibly worthy and important thing to focus on. And so once we decided that seafood was the area that we needed to focus on, then we needed to figure out, okay, well, which one? And so applying a similar lens, we said, well, what is the most consumed seafood in the United States? And after shrimp, it's salmon. And we loved salmon because it's a local fish to where I'm calling in from here in the Bay Area in California, all the way up into Alaska. So it's literally our backyard fish. And it is so widely accepted around the world. It is truly a global fish that is in so many dishes that we just love eating. And so it was a very obvious choice for us to focus on salmon.
Wildtype Foods has sustainability at its core. What role do you envision cultivated seafood playing in mitigating the environmental impact of traditional fishing and aquaculture practices? Perhaps you could elaborate a little bit on how your brand's mission aligns with the environmental preservation.
Yeah, normally when you're thinking about food and the climate, we think about cows belching methane, right? And that's sort of immediately where our minds go. And I think that's a really important bit of work that counterparts working on beef alternatives are doing. But in the case of seafood, it's a slightly different problem, right? And here, when we think about our oceans that store roughly 92% of the carbon on our planet, we have this very delicate ecosystem that maintains the oceans as our planet's refrigerators effectively. And we know for a fact that we've pushed many species of fish to the point of extinction. Hopefully we'll be able to protect many more. And so when we think about our mission, this question constantly comes up, which is, we're going to have 3 billion more people on the planet. They're all going to want to eat as much seafood as, let's say, Western, European, and North American consumers. Where's that going to come from? And if we can avoid leaving nothing in our oceans but jellyfish, we should do that. Because I don't know about you, but I worry about our ocean's ability to continue to perform the vital role that they do on this planet if we remove all of the vibrant sea life that is there. And so our mission, I think, from an environmental perspective, is to protect biodiversity. And I'll just give you an example of something that we did last year that I'm so proud of. There was a big open air copper mine that was going to go, and is still planned for Alaska, called Pebble Mine. And an environmental group up there called the Nature Conservancy was trying to raise some money to protect the watersheds around in the forests and the sort of waterways around where that mine was going to go. And there was kind of unequivocal data that if that mine went in, it would wipe out the last surviving like wild salmon stock. It's where most of the world's sockeye is fished, which is not only a source of tremendous amounts of jobs for Alaskans, but is a worldwide treasure in terms of biodiversity. And so we help them raise the money needed to put a conservation easement on that land and to protect one of the last healthy wild salmon fisheries on the planet. And, we found ourselves allied with fishermen in Alaska and the native corporations that are there. And I think there is no better example of our environmental mission than work like that, right? Where together we're preserving these wild places so that the planet can continue to perform its really important function.
Wow, what an amazing example, and one that shows that we can work together as well. Alternative seafood brands don't need to be pitted against, traditional fishing. Exactly. Culinary experiences are obviously very central to seafood. To change the topic slightly, how does Wildtype ensure that its cultivated seafood not only matches but surpasses the taste and texture expectations of traditional seafood to consumers?
Look, it's really difficult to put it lightly, right? Like recreating the culinary experience from the most basic building blocks of life, which is the cell, up into this really complex organism, which in our case is the salmon, and choosing to focus as we have on raw sort of sushi grade preparations is this extraordinarily high bar. And so the way that we've tackled this thing is that, we appreciate on day one the product's not going to be perfect, but we've held ourselves to a standard of let's make something that's better than anything else that's on offer on the planet. And I'm proud to say that we've done that, but our work isn't done, right? The texture can improve. I think the delicate flavor notes of like that perfect piece of fresh salmon, that you can only fish wild a few months out of the year is really difficult to replicate. And I think we're getting close, but I think, it could be a little bit more noticeable, let's say, right? And so that's sort of the state where we are today, which is something that we're incredibly proud of, but there's certainly room for improvement. And so I think the really exciting part of this whole industry is that consumers are going to be able to go on that journey with us, right? They're not going to, like, the first product that they taste, I know is going to be way worse than the thing that we're going to introduce 2 years from now. And so I am personally really excited about that because there aren't so many experiences like that where you get to see such vast improvements in products that get better and better. And I am also heartened to see so many other companies around the world working on plant-based products, other cultivated seafood companies, just because there are hundreds of aquatic animals that are consumed by humans, right? And there's just a lot of work to be done. And we all need to be successful for us to make a dent in that big environmental challenge I was mentioning at the front.
Continuing the theme of progress, as Wildtype gains momentum, what are your ambitions for scaling up production and making cultivated seafood more accessible to a wider audience? What are the key factors in achieving this expansion sustainably?
So the FAO estimates that we're going to have a global seafood shortage of something on the order of 23 million tons by 2030. I mean, if you just like think about how much weight that is and like where's that going to come from? Like when I think about our mission, it's to help solve that problem, right? And it's so daunting, just given the state of where our field is today, right? And so our friends across the bay, Good Meat, that have launched their product at one of Jose Andres's restaurants in DC. They're serving, I think Josh said something like 6 or so servings a week. That just gives you a sense, which is nothing, right? And it's no knock on them. It's just creating a new method of food production from scratch. And sure, we can borrow from biofarm, we can borrow from traditional food manufacturing. It's just really difficult. And I think it's the main thing that we're going to need to focus on, right? So if you think about August, which ends today, 10 years ago, Mark Post introduced his first hamburger in the Netherlands. I think it was like 10 years and 2 weeks ago. And for this first 10 years, our field has been focused on getting regulatory approval, making prototypes, hiring good scientists, raising some money. And we've done phenomenally impressive things, quite frankly. And the products have gotten much better over that period of time. I mean, I look back on our first thing that we introduced, and it's like barely recognizable as salmon. So all of that gives me a tremendous amount of hope. The next 10 years, the game is totally different. It's doing exactly what you said, which is like, how do we scale this up and to even begin to make a dent in this 23 million tons that we need to find somewhere on the planet without wrecking Mother Earth? And by the way, wild fishermen, fish farmers, they all kind of have the same question in their heads, like, how the heck are we going to do this? That is the name of the game. And you didn't ask me this, but I'll offer it anyway. The way that we get there is not by operating as little independent startups here in San Francisco. That's just not going to move the needle. We need allies. We need allies like Cargill and Tyson and JBS, and we need to help show them that this is A, possible, and B, you can make a profit actually selling products like this. And I know in mission-driven companies rarely use the P word, but like, you can't run a sustainability business if you're not a self-sustaining company. I think that's obvious, right? And so that is really where our field needs to focus. And I'm glad you brought it up, because it is the most important thing that we all need to be focused on. And of course, improving our products, delighting customers, holding ourselves to incredibly high environmental standards and so on. We need to do all of that. But first and foremost is scaling and bringing costs down to the point where this can be a mass market product.
You just mentioned strategic partnerships ever so slightly there. Could you share any insights into any collaborations or partnerships that have been instrumental in Wildtype's journey?
So Cargill made an investment in Wildtype in our Series B round, which was about a year and a half ago at this point now. They have been truly incredible partners across the board. I mean, when we were building our second manufacturing facility, which is now done here in San Francisco, they let us come tour some of their big plants, because we were trying to figure out, what level of build do we need here? Do we need pharma build? Do we need something much lower? How do we maintain sterility at the lowest possible cost? Because we're not selling drugs here, right? Where you can kind of just charge whatever you need to break even. We're selling food, and food needs to be accessible and affordable. So they were helpful with that. They've been helpful in understanding markets, sharing market insights and data with us on the technical side. Like I can go on and on and on. The point though is that I think they, like us, are grappling with the same big questions, which is like, them as a massive food provider, they're thinking about, how are we going to continue to keep our promise to sort of nourish the world in a sustainable way if we don't innovate, right? And I think there's just this beautiful moment that we're in right now, where like the big food companies are asking the same questions that we're asking. And for them to lean on smaller, innovative, disruptive companies like startups like Wildtype and Upside and Good Meat and all these other companies, I think makes a ton of sense for them. And they've really had open minds and hearts and have been just beyond helpful so far.
That is extremely encouraging to hear.
Yeah, and it's funny, I think like people think about these big companies as these monoliths that like never change, and there's nothing further from the truth. I mean, they are so interested in innovation, and they obviously need to have sustainably produced food, just like we do, and they're working their butts off to make that happen.
Obviously, we need to shift consumer preferences towards these sustainable options that everyone's working towards. How do you see the role of education and awareness in driving the adoption of cultivated seafood? What strategies is Wildtype employing to bridge the gap between innovation and consumer understanding?
I am eternally grateful to Impossible Foods for blazing a trail here, because they truly have an innovative technology. And I think we can learn a lot from their first few years in market that we can apply to our field, right? And so what we know, and I was one of these people, the early adopters for these kinds of products are people who are just interested in like a new thing, right? Like, wow, you made this product that contains real salmon, like not in a salmon. I want to try that. We're fooling ourselves if like we don't appreciate that that's a significant motive for people in the early days. And it might even be people who are just haters and want to blow us up on social media if it's not perfect, which is going to happen. That's just a reality. It isn't perfect yet. It's going to get better. But I think that's the first part. And those people and their experiences will help educate folks. The other thing that I think is really important for us to do is to point out that we have some real advantages over conventional seafood, and that all of these things, like I mentioned, these contaminants that you're just not going to find in our products, is a real advantage, right? Even if you don't believe in the climate crisis and you don't care about the environment, which, you know, I think there aren't very many people that don't care about preserving our wild places, but let's assume that you didn't care about that. I think a lot of people would still be excited to have mercury-free seafood. You know, that's a big deal. And so I think getting the word out that there are some real advantages here. You know, even if this isn't like the finest Copper River salmon that you can get 2 months out of the year up in Alaska, it will get there. But in the meantime, we have a real value proposition here that should be interesting to a lot of folks.
Wildtype appears to have a global perspective. How do you see cultivated seafood contributing to addressing food security challenges on a global scale? I know you mentioned the mass amount of food we need to produce. What impact do you hope wild food will have on the broader global food system?
I think we need to take it step by step. So first, before we can even have these conversations, we obviously need to scale up our production capabilities. And we're all working really hard to sort of start designing now that next, you know, 10 times, 50 times bigger facilities. That's the next step. And then once that comes into effect, there's a couple of paths we can take. One, we can just take our time and build one plant at a time and never move the needle. Or we can inspire big companies to adopt these kinds of technologies and build a bunch of them in the places where they're most needed. And you can probably tell like where my opinion is on that subject. One might be the more profitable thing for a company to do. The other is going to help us achieve the mission that we all need to see done. And that really is the heart of our mission. And so when you think about food security and where we can have the biggest impact, I think about where's the most seafood consumed. And it's not in North America, it's not in Western Europe, it's in Asia. And so unquestionably, that is where our future is and where we've started building some preliminary relationships to start thinking about regulatory approval in these countries and so on.
My final question then might dip into that a tiny bit. What next for Wildtype? What is the next steps for the company and for your products?
So we've been engaged in a multi-year process with our friends at the U.S. Food and Drug Administration to complete a safety assessment. Your guess is as good as mine in terms of when that will complete. But as soon as that's done, we're very excited to introduce our products commercially in some restaurants here in the United States. So in a way, it won't be that different or interesting from what other companies have done. You know, we'll be selling in restaurants and getting consumer feedback, using that to inform where we take development of our next generation of products. What are the things that people really care about? Those are the questions we can answer. And then, of course, as I mentioned, you probably got a sense we are laser focused as one can be on scaling. Like we just need to do that. We need to be able to grow aquatic cells at orders of magnitude greater scales than has ever been done on the planet before, which is a daunting task, but we 100% have the right team here to be able to do that. And so if we do that while maintaining exquisite quality among our products and giving consumers a real reason to try our products that's sticky, right, that gets them coming back for a third and a fourth and a fifth purchase, then, you know, we've succeeded.
Finally, what is your favorite dish using your own product?
I had a bite of Wildtype salmon minced in this little like tart that one of our like a chef prepared that was just so good. I'd say it's a tie between that and Wildtype smoked salmon, which is just, I mean, it's amazing. You kind of turn that into your favorite sort of breakfast bagel thing, and yeah, I feel great about eating that.
You're making me hungry.
Yeah. I know it's dinner time there, but it's really delicious dish.
Amazing. Thank you so much for chatting with me today, Justin. This is such an interesting conversation.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. Thanks for having me, Gemma.